Live and we're about to have, we are live. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. This is the House Committee on General and Housing. And today is the 15th of January. I'm Mark Holly, and our next witness is Kathleen Burke, Executive Director of Vermont Housing, Vermont State Housing Authority. Kathleen, why don't you introduce yourself formally, and then were you in the, I don't think you were in the room the last time members of the committee introduced themselves, were you?
I was not.
Okay, well, we will introduce ourselves.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Kathleen Burke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Housing Authority. Thank you for inviting me in this morning.
Well, welcome. Why don't you start?
Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Ashley Bartley, and I represent Fairfax in the majority of Georgia.
Good morning, Leonora Dodge. I represent Essex Town in the city of Essex Junction.
Departments, Orange County. I'm Charlton, Athens, Grafton, Chester, and London.
I'm Debbie Dolgan from St. Johnsbury, Kirby, and Concord.
Thank you.
I'm Gail Pezzo, representing Chittenden and 20 Colchester.
I'm Mary Howard. I represent Rutland City District 6. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows. I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Hi.
Rep. Claudia Lamont, and I represent the Loyal Washington District, Morristown, Elmore, Worcester, Woodbury, and Small Parkstown.
And I'm Mark Holly, and I represent Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield, and Emily Krasnow, who will be with us in a moment, represents Southfield.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Portions of it.
So we're going to be diving into the work that the Vermont State Housing Authority does here in the state of Vermont. Not like the low-income housing tax credit program or, but very integral to the work that you've been hearing that Evernorth does and the work of the nonprofit housing providers around the state. I did prepare a PowerPoint presentation, which I actually copied and handed out. So you should all have that if you want to follow along. So the Vermont State Housing Authority's mission is to ensure that quality, affordable housing opportunities are available to Vermonters statewide. We were established in 1968.
Please, before you go on, do you want your slides up?
If you'd like to pull them up, that would be lovely.
That way people who are watching the video can see them as well.
Thank you.
But you'll have to signal to her when you want your slides changed.
Okay, can do that. We'll just pause a moment and let the slides show. Okay.
Next slide, I guess we should. Yeah.
Perfect. So a little bit about who we are. We were established in 1968. We have the distinction of being the first statewide housing authority in the country. Our original charge was to improve housing conditions throughout the state of Vermont. We are not a state agency or a department of state government. We are referred to as a quasi-state agency, similar to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. We do not receive any direct appropriation from the legislature to do our work. And I'll add that the VSHA Board of Commissioners are appointed by the governor and then confirmed by the Senate. That is our connection to state government. So we're referred to as an instrumentality of the state, created for the purpose of improving housing conditions, but also as a conduit to receive federal housing assistance from the government. Moving along.
I'm just asking one, what's the relationship with VHA?
So sure, the Burlington
VFA. Wait,
Burlington
Yeah.
Housing Authority.
VHFA.
Oh, VHFA. we are housing partners. We collaborate, we work together, we are separate businesses. So I'll just pause there. That's an important question. And that Vermont is unique in a lot of ways, right? One of the ways too is the statewide housing authority and the state housing finance agency are two separate entities. In most states, they're one entity. The Vermont State Housing Authority was created first in 1968, and a couple of years later, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency was created. And so here in Vermont, we have two state agencies, one that focuses on finance and one that focuses on housing assistance. VHFA is more like a bank, if you will, and the Vermont State Housing Authority is a tenant-facing organization.
Go ahead.
The core programs of the authority are strongly impacted by actions at the federal level. HUD's Section 8 and Continuum of Care programs and the housing programs of USDA's rural development are funded by acts of Congress.
And you administer them here.
We administer those programs here in Vermont. The Vermont State Housing Authority administers the largest portfolio of federally funded Section 8 rental subsidies in the state. We also support the development of affordable housing by awarding project-based Section 8 vouchers to communities. And so I want to make the nexus to Kathy's earlier conversation. She showed Central in Maine as a project that's being developed right now in Windsor. Our agency has made a commitment for Section 8 project-based vouchers for that property. So the property is then able to serve extremely low-income households and folks with special needs.
Road.
I just have a very quick question that I'm, because due to ignorance.
No, nothing is.
Section 8 subsidies are a HUD program.
Mhm.
Do they require services to be attached to them?
Some do. So, and others don't. Section 8 is a term that's used very globally, and it speaks to a form of rental assistance that is provided by Housing and Urban Development. Under that umbrella, there's many targeted programs that Housing and Urban Development makes available to public housing authorities to apply for and to administer, which our agency does. I'll just call out, last week I shared with you all a fairly lengthy narrative of the work that we do that describes the various programs in detail. So the nuanced detail that you're asking for. That describes those programs that may require services, or if the program may be targeted to a non-elderly disabled household, for example, or youth that are exiting foster care. I mean, those are all programs that we administer under the umbrella of the Section 8 rental assistance program.
But you don't administer you just provide the mechanism for the support. You don't provide the support, right?
We do administer a family self-sufficiency program, which is a program that, again, it's described in the narrative, but it's a program by which we work with families to assist them in becoming economically self-sufficient. And so work with them around education, job training, job search, those kinds of things. It's a 5-year program. The benefit of the program largely is that as families participate in the program, they can accumulate a savings account or an escrow account. So as they become more successful and their rent contribution goes down or goes up and the subsidy goes down, that difference, that savings and subsidy goes into an escrow account or a savings account to benefit that family. And this is a program that we've been administering since the early 90s. It's about 200 units large, 200 families large, and it's not unusual for a family to graduate after 5 years with a a savings account of $25,000 or $30,000 that they then can take those funds and apply it to a down payment, or there are no restrictions on how those funds are used, but that's an example of a program that we do administer to benefit families and helping them achieve self-sufficiency.
I'm just trying to understand. One of my towns has has complained about, or some of my constituents in one of my towns have complained about Section 8 housing, not about having the vouchers, but about a lack of the wraparound supports. And I'm just trying to understand, again, forgive my total ignorance in
No,
this
it's-
area, but so when HUD says, here's your vouchers, go ahead and hand them out, and there's, different types of vouchers. They hand out only the vouchers, and the state comes up with the funding for the support and the people power of the support. Is that right?
Typically, absolutely, that is the case.
Okay.
That's a
Or
very,
doesn't come up with it.
Or doesn't.
or doesn't come up with it.
But it's a state's
But
responsibility.
yes, it's that three-legged stool that we've talked
Yeah, yeah,
a lot
yeah.
about over the course of the last few years, right? So our
So-
agency is providing the rental assistance. Often we do need services. Many of the programs and in communities, affordable housing communities that we develop, there is an agreement with a local service provider to provide services to the community, but that's under the terms of a memorandum of understanding. And so affordable housing providers have to develop those collaborations and relationships. And then, of course, we need the housing.
But I'm just trying to figure out where the onus is. Is the onus on the state to provide the funding for?
Yes,
Okay,
it absolutely is.
okay.
Is, I know we're gonna run out of time in 10 minutes. You've got slides, but I can't resist a question.
No, this is education.
You
This is.
say in the slide that you awarding project-based Section 8. Am I right? You guys don't contribute to the capital stack. You say by Section 8, you'll be guaranteeing rents, right?
And it's operating income to the property.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And so
Okay.
just to, again, while it's fresh in your mind, Director Winters was here yesterday and he showed you 3 communities that they recently developed in the town of Hartford. All 3 of those communities, we have substantial rental assistance commitments for. Okay,
thank
so
you. Okay,
and we can get into the granular of that, but I would also go as far as to say that there are situations by which if we don't make the commitment for a project-based voucher, that the project may not get over the finish line.
Right.
So moving along in the spirit of time, on the next slide, in addition to the federal rental assistance programs that we administer, we also administer several grants on behalf of the state of Vermont. And these funds typically run through the Department of Housing and Community Development or the Agency of Human Services. Again, we don't receive a direct appropriation from the legislature. Examples of those programs that we're administering now is our Rent Arrearage Assistance Fund, which finally was funded as part of the last session. Our Landlord Relief Program, that is a risk pool for landlords to incentivize them to rent to families with subsidy. That doesn't have to be a housing choice voucher. That could be a Vermont rental subsidy, any type of subsidy, but to incentivize owners to rent to families with subsidy. And in turn, if there are damages caused by that tenancy or unpaid rent, then the risk pool will help compensate the landlord for those costs. This program was funded by the legislature 2 years ago. And we'll continue to have funding through this year. Likely we'll be back asking for continued appropriation next year. Our mobile home improvement and repair program, again, that's a program that we administer in partnership with the Department of Housing and Community Development. Our rapid response mobile home infill program, which is a new initiative that where we have partnered up with the Agency of Transportation to rapidly infill new mobile homes in existing mobile home park communities in the state of Vermont. We administer a grant for the Department of Mental Health called the Housing Subsidy Plus Care. That's a rental assistance program that operates like a Section 8 voucher, but is targeted to individuals that are exiting institutions, who are seriously mentally ill, exiting institutions, or who are at risk of being institutionalized. And then we administer a small grant for the Department of Health as a transitional housing assistance grant. And those funds essentially are targeted to another program that we administer for VHCB, the Vermont Housing and Conservation. Now things are different lingo, different world. Our HOPWA program, Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS. That is a very nuanced program. The transitional housing assistance is provided to folks that are on a waiting list who are waiting for that permanent housing voucher, that HOPWA housing voucher.
Okay, let me just ask you, so because what I'm hearing is you guys know how to relate to renters and where they're assisted. And so you have various state programs where they're essentially contracting with you to run programs for them.
That's right.
But your core Section 8 stuff, who pays for the administrative part of that? Is the Section 8 money, a little piece of it come to you for administration?
Sure, that's a very good question. So we receive an administrative fee for administering the Housing Choice Voucher program. And the way that that administrative fee is earned is for each housing unit that we lease or each voucher that we lease. And so for each voucher that we lease, we may earn $100 a year in administrative fee to offset the cost of administering the program. Okay, that's a very simplistic explanation, but the only way that we earn administrative fees is if our vouchers are leased and we're assisting our families.
Thank you, go ahead.
In aggregate, the Vermont State Housing Authority touches over 8,500 Vermont families with rental assistance benefits. Now I'm going to move on to something that is very impactful and needs to be brought to the attention of this committee. If you don't already know, there was last week an article by Vermont Digger as well as 7 Days that was socializing concerns around reductions to the Housing Choice Voucher Program budget. And I would say the articles were specific to that program, but there are concerns with the federal housing budget in general and what this Congress may elect to do. So socializing for this group, what that may mean for Vermont. So again, we continue to operate, or the government operates under a continuing resolution that is due to expire in mid-March. At that point in time, it's my hope that we'll have a spending bill, that Congress will pass a spending bill and we'll know what our budget is for this year. They could also elect to extend the continuing resolution and kick the can down the road. When there's an extension and a continuing resolution, essentially our budgets and our housing programs continue to be funded, but based on the prior year's appropriation. Okay, we all know that housing costs increase, housing assistance payments increase, and so in essence, you're looking at a reduction in program. But what's really important for you to understand is HUD socialized in early December that based on bills going through Congress, that PHAs should evaluate their programs and they should plan as if we will receive 97.5% of what we actually need to administer the Housing Choice Voucher Program. That same letter, and I don't really like to talk about this too much, but I think it's a hard reality, is that in that same letter, they socialized or it could be as low as 88.8%. That's significant. If the Housing Choice Voucher Program budget is funded at that 97.5%, what that means for the state of Vermont, and I've socialized this with all the public housing authorities in Vermont, so this is a Vermont aggregate number. Over the course of the remaining months and calendar year of this calendar year, we would need to remove approximately 700 families from our Housing Choice Voucher Program in order for our budgets to come in line with our spending to come in line with our budget. So what that means is, 700 fewer families receiving rental assistance. It means new vouchers are not being offered to waiting lists. I don't think I need to draw the nexus to the implications that this issue has. It also, back to your question about administrative fees, for our agency, if we have to take 500 vouchers offline over the course of the year, that's $50,000. That's a position. And so now you start to see the real life implications of this. So I urge the committee to really stay in tune to this issue. It also and I'll leave this point. I know that we're running out of time. This issue also impacts our ability to make commitments, project-based voucher commitments to, for example, 747, the projects that Director Winter shared with you yesterday, Riverwalk, and so on and so forth. So moving on.
You had a question?
How can 2.5% bring 700 like how many families are we funding? Is it 97.5% more than 700? Like,
In the aggregate, Vermont right now is assisting about 6,000 families
okay.
with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. You have to keep in mind, the 97.5% is what they're funding based on what the agency needs to operate their program today. And typically, housing costs increase over time, right? Landlords increase their rent, taxes increase, insurance increases. So there's a need for rents to increase.
And so that's
in
700
response,
families number
and
is
so
taking
in
into
response to that, the average subsidy that our agency is making for one household had increased 10% this year, it increased 10% the prior year, 10% the prior year. And so housing costs and housing subsidy costs are going like this, but Congress isn't adequately funding the budget based on what's actually needed. And so it creates a downward spiral in the program and creates issues for the following year as well. Again, very nuanced, and I'll have the opportunity to come back and get into the weeds of this, but say the way that our voucher budget is funded on a year-to-year basis by Congress is based on what our spending was the prior year. So if I'm taking 500 units off my program, that means that Congress is going to fund 500 fewer units the next year.
Sadia, go ahead, but then I'll have to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay.
Our problem
Well,
is-
I can hold on.
You can always reach out to me, and I would love the opportunity to come back and talk with you.
I'll let you finish.
We may have that happen, thank you.
Okay.
What was that number of how many families or
700.
no,
Seven.
6,000 total.
6,000?
Okay. And then just wrapping up, just sort of establishing what our legislative priorities are for this year. I mean, certainly, in keeping with the other folks that you've already heard from, full funding for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and the good work that they do. Continued funding for our rental arrears prevention program. This was funded last year. This will run out of money this year, and it's based on our current spend. We're likely to run out of money in September. But I do strongly advocate that we continue to keep that operational and keep families in their housing. Again, base funding for the mobile home improvement and repair program and continued funding for the mobile home infill program. And then the slides that follow are just detailed information about those initiatives that we're requesting continued appropriation for. So I think this is a good place to stop. Happy to entertain any questions. If folks have questions, you can certainly reach out to me. My contact information is here. And thank you for allowing me the time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So our final witness for this morning is Peter Gregory. Peter, do you want to come and have a seat? Were you in the room when the committee just introduced itself?
Yes, actually I was. So thank you.
Would you state your name and title for the record and welcome?
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Gregory. I'm Executive Director of the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, headquartered in Woodstock. We serve 30 small towns in northern Windsor, most of Orange, one town in Rutland, and two in Addison. So it's a relatively large region. So thank you very much for inviting me here, and congratulations on your chairmanship, Chairman Alley. I was under the impression that you wanted a housing perspective from my area. I know you're going to have all the regional planning commissions, or a few in, I think this afternoon, to talk globally about what regional planning commissions do. So I won't get into those details, but we are political subdivisions of the state. We're not nonprofits, so we are a governmental entity. And we work on the housing issue in one specific area primarily. We've had some wonderful speakers in the last few days. We work with each of those folks, but they are the subject experts in what they do. I'll just talk a little bit about what regional planning commissions do on the housing issue, specifically in my region. So awareness and understanding of the issue, the problem, is certainly a key role for us. We work in partnership with Twin Pines and Vital Communities and other nonprofits and housing developers to raise awareness of the issue and how it relates to the economy and job creation and job retention. As a regional planning commission, we do hire professionals, and they find it difficult to find housing. So it's something that affects us as it does all private sector employees as well. Local and regional planning and regulation is certainly what we do. The regional plan, which we're required to do, has addressed housing in all aspects of it for a long time. We participate in regulatory proceedings in support of housing projects. We have also worked very diligently with our communities on updating their town plans and their bylaws, and those are the foundations in which developments have to navigate. So it's important for them to be thoughtful in their work and to understand what they need to do to expedite the production of housing. As some have indicated, the scale of housing is really an issue in a lot of our towns. We all talk about the need and the crisis and the economy and all that. It's quite a different story when you're out in a planning commission, you know, at 7 o'clock at night when it's snowing, and you talk about how you need to come up with more housing. Nonetheless, we have those conversations and try to scale the work that we're doing with the size of the community. We've done visualization programs with Rochester, for example, where we can say, you don't think there's any room for any housing outside the floodplain in your village? We can show with the computer that you can infill a number of units that they don't believe would fit. And it's eye-opening. So they think, oh, maybe we can do something. So that's a kind of awareness and work we do with our communities. The work that the legislature has done over the last few years, I want to thank you all. You did address a lot of local regulation. There's more to do, especially on appeals, which I'll touch on briefly in a minute. Last year, the Balanced Act 250 bill was definitely a housing bill. The interim exemptions are in place and are being used around the state. And fairly in my region right now, there's a new development proposal of 20 to 30 units that would have had to go through Act 250 and will not have to. So it's working as intended. All the regional planning commissions are working on their regional plan maps to further expand village boundaries and set the state up again for easier permitting at the state level and more housing production. One area I would like to point out is I think the next area for the legislature to investigate is state permitting over at the Agency of Natural Resources and the Division for Historic Preservation. All good people, all good programs, but there certainly should be a review of those areas to see if the timelines are right, if the staffing is adequate. This administration over the last number of years has been reluctant to add staff to make things work. I don't think they're properly staffed, in my opinion. And I would like to suggest that the legislature take a look at that, because we complain about the speed at which permits are granted, but then don't provide the agency with the resources to do the work we expect of them. Brownfields development, a brownfields assessment and cleanup, something the regional planning commissions have been very, very involved in. The RPCs have brought in millions of federal discretionary dollars directly from EPA. And then the state of Vermont has also backfilled with a lot of state dollars in assessment and remediation. Those are good investments. They help not only housing, but other commercial and job creation development in our downtowns. I mean, there are a lot of environmental crises all around the rural areas. We can't deal with them all, but we do prioritize housing and downtown redevelopment. So I would respectfully ask that this committee weigh in on the brownfields portion of appropriations in the coming year. Continued investment, even in these tough fiscal times, I think is essential to keep the pipeline open for development in our downtowns and bring these properties back to productive use. I think we've heard a little bit about how infrastructure investment has not kept pace with our desires to increase density in our downtowns, whether it be housing or anything else. Federal government is not one that we can rely on entirely for investments in infrastructure. So I think if there is a proposal from the administration or elsewhere to invest in water, sewer type investments in our downtowns to enable more dense development, that's what our communities need more than anything. They cannot, on the property tax, deal with that. Even when some are talking about wanting to do something, they cannot fund that. They can barely fund the repairs and some of the lack of investment in their existing systems. And then if I could get into a couple of statutory changes. The state has kind of preempted local zoning in some aspects, but yet the communities still have to go through a bit of an onerous process to actually update the bylaws that they need to update. So we've got some language that, if interested, I would provide that would smooth the adoption process at the local level for changes that have already been required as of state law changing. Appeals, I'm sure you'll hear a lot about that. I'm sure you already have. Our district commission appeals, Act 250 plus local zoning appeals. I think there's some ways at looking at making appeals less palatable for those that appeal by putting some cost back on those that appeal if they are unsuccessful. We see that as a huge problem, and I know you've heard a lot about that. Then there's certainly tax policy that other committees will be looking at, but would be certainly within your wheelhouse. Sales taxes for affordable housing projects, reducing or eliminating those. And just helping regional planning commissions be the entity that automatically is there for our communities to help our towns. So I've got some of the details that if you're interested, I can certainly share at some point, but I didn't want to be redundant in what you've heard from other witnesses, but just give you kind of an overview of what we were thinking, what we're doing in our region.
Peter, how you have more detail? What's the best way for you to provide it to us, if not in live testimony?
I can write it up in a presentable fashion and provide it to the committee.
I think that would be very useful
Okay.
because we're going to have to be operating at that level.
Right. the session has crept up on me and I meant to have this in advance, but I will get that too very shortly.
Questions for Peter?
Thank you.
And Nora?
I am curious about the tax losses that the state would face if we were to, say, adopt, this sort of an elimination based on like a carve out if you're doing housing development. How do we proceed? Like, I know it's not entirely, we're not Ways and Means, but before I advocate for something like that, I would like to know, just like I've sat on transportation, I've seen what, losing a gas tax means for, our roads and bridges. And so I'm just curious if we are about to see this huge growth in building and we're giving everybody who builds a tax break, what's that going to look like?
Well, it's a very good question, and certainly one that we thought of as a staff suggesting something like that. But whether it's a direct appropriation or a tax expenditure, it does affect the bottom line, and Ways and Means and Finance and Appropriations will be dealing with that balancing. And so what is the priority in the state? What should we be investing in? Should we invest in something differently? It may, based on our needs, we may not be able to afford that. But these are ideas that, if from your policy perspective, deserve some attention and some airing. I think that's what the committee would need to, those committees of jurisdiction would need to hear, that this is your priority. See if you can make it work based on all the other pressures they face.
Thanks. To what degree do RPCs work together?
We work together very closely. We meet on a monthly basis, so we know best practices. We work on behalf of each other, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon. But we also work across state lines. I'm on the board of the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Planning Commission and vice versa. And Andrew Winter from Twin Pines is on my board. So you can't learn from one another unless you're actively engaged, and we have been for a long time.
So what, if you have a regional planning commission that is not functioning properly, can the peer RPCs influence the one to kind of correct that?
Well, I have to assume that you're referring to an RPC in another state, because I hope so, but it's a serious question. The RPC is based on direction and an offer from us last year in Act 181, the Act 250/Housing Bill. Have an independent study of the regional planning commissions going on right now, and that'll be to the legislature within, I think, a month or month and a half.
Okay.
It should identify gaps in service and quality of service and consistency. It's been one of my personal interests for a very, very long time to ensure that we support each other in making sure we have consistent product, we meet our timelines, but it has to be in partnership with state agencies. And I have to admit that there are times where certain state agencies are reluctant to say, Fred's not, timely on his reporting, and they don't talk to the director, they don't talk to us and stuff. But it's a partnership that needs to happen to ensure you're getting the best value for the investment that the state makes in us.
Well, I was just wondering, like with a lot of local, I'm not even talking about planning commissions, but planning commissions are part of it. There's still local volunteers doing it. Some are lucky enough to have expertise and many aren't. So it's sort of a, sometimes I wonder about the self-policing or self-evaluation that goes on with local planning commissions and also regional planning commissions.
Well, we don't do any policing of the local commissions, but we are there to provide the support they need, as well as all state or local boards and commissions. I've been on the staff at Two Rivers since 1989, and I have not seen it as bad as it is right now as far as the town's ability and capacity to deal with what's being thrown at them, whether it's floods, retirements, pay. We've got towns, poaching road crews back and forth. Town managers revolving doors. It's a tough time out there. So we just try the best of our ability to meet the needs of our towns, and they change constantly. There's turnover, people give up. Being in public service is not always a fun thing, especially if some of you have been on school boards. I mean, it can be brutal and unfair. So people are saying, hey, I've got children, I can't do this. I get a call probably once a month from a town saying our zoning administrator left. Can you help us? Can you pitch in for a few months? So we're looking strongly at shared services, different models of how the regional planning commissions can be configured to better serve our community. So
Will that be in the report?
it will be.
Okay.
It will be. Absolutely. Yeah.
Will we be privy to the report?
We will make sure that we have, I think, maybe 6 committees of jurisdiction that were named in the legislation, but it'll be available widely. And I'll make sure, given your question, that this committee gets that report.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Other members of the committee, any questions? For Peter?
One offline. Just one offline if you have time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Peter, 1,000 thank yous for taking time with us. I have a feeling that we'll be talking again.
No, please. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I will follow up with the specifics that I mentioned. I'll get that to your staff and then the report will committee when that's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yes, thank you very much.
Members of the committee, we adjourn for the morning. We're going to break for lunch. At 1 p.m., we have a hearing in which the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board is coming in. And also Charlie Baker, who's the executive director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission and is involved in the organization that represents all of the regional planning commissions. And Catherine Dimitra, who is chair of that group, which is the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. They'll testify. Following their testimony, which is we've allocated substantial time for. At 2:45, we're gonna have a chance to meet with our 2 ledge counsel. Cameron Wood, who specializes in housing, and Sophie Statney, who is ledge counsel for labor. And then at 3 p.m., we'll have to manage our time. Forgive me if I've been a little abrupt, but we have to manage our time, particularly since we have a hard stop at really like just before 3 o'clock for the floor. Any final thoughts, questions?
But we are not meeting after the floor. Is that
No,
right?
we are not meeting after the floor.
Okay.
We are having Thursday morning, by the way, we will have a security briefing at 9 o'clock. This committee, it will not be live streamed. I don't think we have to actually move into executive session, but we're not going to live stream it. So, because it's sensitive in nature.
Yeah.
Anyway, for all of those who testified and for those of you who just came here to watch, thank you very much. And we can now go off live.